my pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Jamie Nunez, to today's Teacher Innovation Network EdTech Playground. Jamie serves as the Western Region Education Manager at Common Sense, where he supports school administrators, educators, students, and parents in addressing digital literacy. With an engaging background as a former high school teacher, school administrator, and executive director for an education center, Jamie has guided thousands of educators in managing media use in schools. Jamie has shared his expertise through TED Talks on student identity in online spaces and led district-wide initiatives on media literacy policies in schools. With over 20 years of experience, he has empowered countless individuals to foster healthy digital habits. Outside of work, Jamie enjoys spending time with his 9-year-old daughter, often teaching her the art of giving compliments to strangers in public places. I'm personally so excited for this session. I hope you're all ready to be energized and inspired. Jamie, take it away.
Geez, Chris, I want that recording just because it makes me sound so exciting. That's pretty powerful, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you all. Hopefully it is Tuesday where you live or where you're sending. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to embrace sort of my presence, but more importantly, the topic at hand. The idea here is I'm going to share my screen in a second. We're going to cover misinformation in the age of AI and maybe give you some actual practical strategies to address what that actually looks like in your space. But before I do that, let me just get a visual from folks. I'm smiling now, but sometimes I can come across as like a jerk because my brows sort of fro up when I'm really intense. Is everybody okay with like the way I look? Or not that I can change that, but does anybody? Okay, cool. And then how about my sound? Do I sound okay to folks? Do you need me to increase my tone or? All right, if you do, or if it's just been one of those days and you need me to call on you or affirm your nonverbals, then just share it in the chat and I'm happy to sort of do that. So all right, let's get started. Here's the hope in terms of your engagement the next hour. The idea is we're going to talk about a very heavy topic, but we're going to talk about it in a way that's really practical, that the aim here is that we can all have collective ideas and thoughts and strategies about how to address it with our students. And so whatever it is that I'm sharing, if you have any additional thoughts, go ahead and unmute and share your perspective or your experiences in the particular content. I work for Common Sense, and so I will be providing some resources related to Common Sense. But this isn't a sales pitch because A, Common Sense is completely free if you sort of know us, and B, the ideas that we're talking about a theme that's much broader. So, all right, here, let me share my screen and we'll get started. All right, let's do the usual. Can everybody see my screen? Can I have a thumbs up? That's great. Great, thank you. Let's get started. So here's a shameless plug for who I am, but not so much about connecting with me on LinkedIn. But if you need some support, sometimes we just need thinking partners. Out of everything that I do, I love working with educators and administrators like yourself. So if you have sort of ideas, struggles, just things that you're thinking about as it relates to this theme, please reach out. Either reach out through LinkedIn or email. I'm very responsive. I really love working with the group as a whole. So there you go. Before we get started, just for folks that aren't familiar, I'll add the link on the deck on the chat in a second. If you're not familiar with Common Sense, we have for the last 20 years helped to do a number of things. If you're a parent on this call, we've helped to address and select media that's appropriate for your child. If you're an educator on the call, like many of you are, we have a free curriculum that we've been working with educators in school districts for a number of years to help adopt things like digital citizenship and now things like AI literacy. And finally, if you're not familiar with our legislative work, we have for a number of years now pushed legislators to create bills and laws that hold tech companies accountable for features that they share that harm our kids. So that's essentially who it is. Let me share my deck for a second. Let me stop sharing just for a second, just so you all can have access to everything I'm saying. And let me share it one more time and we'll go from there. All right, let's level set by really thinking about what media literacy is at this stage. I want to operationally define the term just so we all are aware of what it is that we're talking about, or what it is that when I use this term, how I actually think and conceptualize this work. The way I think about it in real simple terms is the idea that we need to understand how and why a message, a media message in particular, how and why it's constructed, And then the hope is that once we understand and once we're able to decipher that, then we can actually engage in a manner that helps to co-create or create an alternative mediaverse or create a way in which we can do something about it. That's the sort of civic engagement piece. And one of the things that I often think about when I share this term is who is actually good at constructing and deconstructing messages on media. And so here's what I want you to do first. I'm going to call on whoever maybe blinks first. And then I'm going to ask you all to think about how good you are at deconstructing any messages that you've seen online. This could be anything from the news to some video that you saw on YouTube last night. So Nanette Cooper, I saw you blink first. I'm sorry to call on you. You can say pass, but how good are you at deconstructing message? You can say like, no, thank you as well. Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that. I'll pause on you. Austin, can I go to you next? Just because I think I saw a smile on your face. Can I ask you to unmute and share sort of how good you are at deconstructing media messages in your life?
Um, wow. Well, how do we define deconstructing messaging? Let's start with that.
I love that. Just the way whether or not you know a message is truthful or not, whether or not you think you've been duped by a message, whether you feel like the message is accurate, anywhere you want to take it, whatever comes
I
up
think
with.
the first step I would do is just start to ask questions.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I would let's take a step back. I would start to critical think. Critical thinking. This is what I tell my students. Think about it first. Where is this message coming from? Who is it coming from? Is it legitimate? So let's start with the whole critical thinking aspect first. Then we move on to the next step.
I love it. I'm going to unmute the rest of the session and just let you take over my slides because either you saw my deck or spot on. And what I really liked about, and thank you, Austin, for sharing. What I really admired and appreciated what you shared is the idea that curiosity is the first sort of step in understanding what a message is and what it's not, right? And I know as an adult and even as an educator, you are conveying that to your students, it sounds like. But too often enough, that curiosity is not the foundation for deconstructing a message. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Deb, do you mind if I call on you next? Just because I liked your style. Yeah.
I was word that popped in my head was skeptical,
Yeah.
and so I'm always, I think, like was just said, just ready to ask questions and look at sources and look at kind of the reason behind we're being presented with certain information because there's always a message I think that people want to send to us.
Absolutely. And I like the term that you use, right? This healthy skepticism that's very helpful. And the other thing that I heard you say is the amount of messages that we're bombarded with, whether or not we can provide sort of that lens of skepticism within each of those messages that receive. Why do I spend as much time in the presentation actually level setting for us? Because when we talk about terms like media literacy, they're often very vague, right? They're often very sort of big and nebulous. And as Austin and Deb sort of pointed out, the idea here is we want to first start with definitions that actually apply and work for your students. Because what we're going to do is now begin the process of not duping them, but begin to figure out what curiosity or what skepticism actually looks like in practice. And so if you're taking notes today, I might sort of encourage you to sort of ask yourself, when I talk about media literacy with my students, if that is a space, how do I define it for myself and for my students? Now, I won't quiz you at the very end to share your definition, but I highly encourage you to sort of note it for yourself as we sort of develop this next stage. All right, let me now, now that we sort of understand where we maybe stand on it, on that, I want to essentially begin to debunk this idea of how media literacy is taught before we get into what are some of the actual trends that we're seeing at Common Sense. How many folks are actually familiar with the Pacific Northwest tree octopus? It's one of the best, I don't know, lessons, right? It's in the Library of Congress. Every time I'm in a media literacy conference, this slide always tends to come up. If you're not familiar with this is a very interesting and very, in my opinion, very antiquated way of thinking about media literacy in the age of AI. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a lesson that's often taught to students, and it helps them to begin to decipher what fake news is and what misinformation actually looks like on a web. But here's the problem with that. Have you all ever seen a website since 1996 that actually looks like this? It's been a while, right? How many of you sort of seen the features that are used don't relate to students' reality online? And so what I argue, I think, when we think about teaching media literacy in this age is that we want to understand how relevant the content that we're using is to our students. And let me give you an example of what that then looks like now in the age of AI. So I'm going to first start. This was supposed to work, but you guys will see the answer first. So I will just sort of assume that you don't see the answer, but I'll attempt to use it as an example for you. This is a classic Morgan Freeman video, and it is actually, I'd like for you to sort of see whether A or B is very real on this. So we're going to play about 10 seconds of this clip, and you're going to tell me what video is actually real in this case. I know what the answer says, but here's what I need you to answer. Look at the video and let me know what video is actually real.
What you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I'm not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality?
All right, let me stop for a second. And then on the chat, if you don't mind, what video is actually real here? Again, my hope is not to like play some game with you, but just to decipher what it is on the chat, if you don't mind, A or B. Which video is real? Oh, Susan, you are so good. Interesting. Let me call on someone just to ask you why you believe that to be the case. So can I start with Kristen Erickson? Sorry, well, you probably didn't feel like you're going to participate on this like Tuesday afternoon, but guess what? It's interactive. Yeah. You don't have to go, Kristen, as well, if you're like on a boat somewhere. All right. Let me pause just for the sake of time. They both are real. If you got that, then that's the case. And why we're saying this is because both those videos were shot in real time. Morgan Freeman was shot obviously different, and then the actor that actually did the deep fake was actually shot as well on real time. So I want to go back to what Austin said a minute ago and what Deb said a minute ago, that we're very curious about that. And so what I'd like to ask you now is, how are you thinking about, when I asked you the question, how are you thinking about which video is real? How are you sort of deconstructing it? How are you actually deciphering that? Janie, do you mind if I start with you, just because I like your background?
I wasn't sure which one was real. I was looking for like the text, like one said fake, one said real, and so I was like, which one is that a trick?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Robert, do you want to chime in on that? I saw you move your position from one of your cheeks to the other with your hand.
Well, I've already seen how, real some of this AI generated stuff could be. So I didn't even want to really like take a stab at which one, because it could have been either to me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, right? And I think that reluctance as we get into it, like the exhaustion that we take to decipher that is very real for our kids, right? So again, I want to go back to the slide that we shared before. These were very easy for many of our students to begin to decipher what is fake and what's real. But the challenge, I think, for us moving forward is not to figure out whether or not A or B is real, but how our kids get at and how they begin to deconstruct whether or not that message is real. And just so you all know, well, I'll hold that to the very end. I'm going to try one more for you all. And that is a sound implication, right? So another trend that we're seeing with deep fakes or misinformation is that before we get into AI and talking about how it influences misinformation, I want to sort of share a trend with you in terms of where AI is going with empathy voiceovers. And now, if you're familiar with this, by all means, feel free to mute. I'm going to share this as an example just so you all are aware of what this is. So this is Hume. If you're not familiar with it, I will put it on the chat. You could follow along. You could try it if you'd like to. AI has been trending in a very different way. And just some context, the tools around AI have many AI companies are now wanting to make the voice of chatbots very authentic. And so Hume is a company, amongst other things, that are trying to authenticate and create a voice and a tone that's empathetic. So I'm going to share with you kind of what that looks like, just so you are aware of what this is. Let's talk to personality. I want to talk to maybe, let's talk to Ito. Hi, Ito. Oh, here it is. Hi, Ito. Nice
It's
to
so
meet
nice
you.
to meet. Oh, that's awesome.
Ito, you sound very real. Can you tell me a little bit about my life and how I
I'm
should?
glad you think so.
I haven't finished speaking, jerk. But can you tell me a little bit about how to alleviate the hot sensation that I feel like? Well, thanks, Ito.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anytime, my friend. I'm here to listen and help in any way I can. As for that hot feeling, it sounds like you might be dealing with a bit of anxiety or stress.
I'm really not, Ito. It's just freaking hot in San Francisco, but thank you. All right, so rather than sort of humor you in this experience, what I attempted to do here is to show you a few things, right? One is the tone of Ito doesn't sound like a bot anymore. And if you look closely into this app, you'll start to sort of recognize that these things are very authentic. But what I'm trying to point out is more for the purposes of the actual flow, what ends up happening as a result of when misinformation and when empathy bots uh, get get in the wrong hands of students, right? And so if you're not familiar with this case, this is a principal in Baltimore County decided to was recently fired over comments, racial comments that he made, and so after investigating, it took some time, but after investigating a number of what the police essentially found out is that it was an actual deep fake using some of these authentic voices. And so the shock value is not really for me to just criticize these technologies, but for you to begin to understand that deep fakes misinformation is grounded on video and audio that often is intended to misinform our students. And this is one of the many unique ways in which they do that. Let me stop for a second and take any questions or thoughts, just general reactions, things that you have experienced in your teaching of some of this with students before we move on. And if you're like, oh my God, Jamie, what is this? I want to check out of this call, then it's all right. Yeah. All right. If you have any general thoughts around this, we haven't. Yeah, Stephanie, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is very alarming in terms of that. Yeah, we can talk about sort of the shock behind all this, but the hope here is that when we start to talk about misinformation and how to address things like media literacy, hopefully I've not only given you sort of an operational definition to start with in these first 20 minutes, but a way in which we need to reframe our thinking around media literacy in this day and age. Does this make sense so far, everyone? Yeah. Okay. Let me move on to let's actually start the process of like, well, thanks, Jamie. I'm over it. What do I do? Here are sort of 4 practical ways that I might, if I were in your shoes, I might begin the process of engaging in this conversation with my community. The first is, as was pointed at the very beginning, we want to actually think about what critical thinking looks like as a culture. The second is we want to really identify what Austin and Deb had shared at the very beginning, which is teaching some very specific skills. The third is expanding sort of our thinking beyond our students and supporting our families to think about and to create some of those healthy media norms. And then finally, if there is some time, I'm going to give you an option, meaning how kids can replicate and co-create healthy media engagement online and how that actually can be used to leverage and reinforce some of the skills you're thinking about around media literacy. All right, so let's get started. Just so you all know, let me give you some quick research just so you are familiar with the trends around AI and media literacy. Why I sort of chosen AI and generative AI specifically as a correlation to misinformation is because the research that we've done at Common Sense points to the fact that our kids are increasingly turning to AI to do a number of things. One of them being getting information. But as we sort of started to research, we also saw a number of other things like making pictures seems to be the second or the third biggest way in which our kids are using it. We're also seeing kids brainstorming ideas, right? Often generated from content that's scraped from different sources that we are not aware of. But one of the things that I see is that when we interviewed students, a third of them suggested that they don't use these tools because they're concerned with, if you look at the bottom, their own privacy and their own sharing of information. Right. So it's important to kind of point out here that not all of our kids are using these tools to get information. And in fact, many of them associate AI with things like cheating and some other unethical behavior. I just want to make sure that we have a balanced sort of thought and approach to this. I also want to sort of point out, given that AI seems to sort of be a big trend, that the idea here is to help our kids identify how AI is being used for not so good things online. And if I had another slide, I might sort of share what those trends look like, but I'll refrain from that. So the idea here is and I'm glossing over the research just to get at the actual practical skills. And what I would do is first, be very, very clear about what skills that you're being taught. And so one of the things I really liked about what Austin said at the very beginning is that he had this curious lens behind what his statement was. And I believe I heard you say, Austin, things that you want to know who created it and what essentially the purpose was. So my next sort of step for you, my next recommendation might then be to identify one of these columns that you might be interested in teaching your students. And so what does that actually look like? We'll get to that in a second. You can look at things like purpose, the intentions behind the creation of it. You might help your students focus in on the impact of watching something and on their overall well-being. The point that Robert made, which is I'm exposed to this, but I just don't want to see it anymore. And it's really hard for me to decipher. In this case, if I were Robert's teacher, we'd talk about how we actually feel when we view something. So these are all components that resonate with media literacy in this day and age. Is this making sense, everyone? Let me just kind of get a nonverbal yes, or Jamie, I stopped paying attention to you 15 minutes ago. We're good? All right. General questions or any ways in which the group has either used these categories or these columns in their own classroom or for their own use case as professionals. All right, good people. So let's figure out how to then apply this in our life. So as I shared a second ago, this idea of creating a culture of critical thinking. If I were to give a lesson on misinformation or media literacy in my classroom, what I would do first is the following. I'd have my definition up on the board when I'm covering this, a very practical definition that I want to share with my students. The second is I would have some type of hook, just as we had today, a video hook of a resource that actually gets kids' attention to have them think critically. And then the third thing I'd want to do as in my space is I'd want to figure out which of these columns I want to focus in on as I think, and I want to scrutinize the media that's been in front of us, to deconstruct the messages I sort of pointed out at the very beginning. Once you've identified what those things are, then the next thing is, and this is where I've seen working with kids where they begin to get very excited. There's a sort of a whack-a-mole mentality that they want to try to address in their life. So meaning they want to try to resolve, or they want to see if they can dupe AI. There's a number of ways in which our kids are sort of looking at. So we'll see if we can model for that now. But before I do, you've been staring at a screen for the last 29 minutes. So do me a favor, let's just take a minute to close our eyes or drink water or smile at yourself or something for about let's go about 1 minute, and then we'll start again at 4:01. So hydrate yourself if you can, and I'll just go around complimenting people as I see their facial expressions. So as I do, is there any thoughts or just general questions? If you do have them, feel free to share them on the chat or unmute. Yeah, and Susan, thank you for that comment. I am now going back into that. It's you're absolutely right, that there's a sense of isolation in that. Yeah, and Gloria, I love that resignation that you have around not seeing AI with sort of excitement. Not that there isn't, but there is that hesitancy for me when I talk about misinformation and that alignment. So thank you for sharing and being vulnerable in that.
I remember trying to teach types of propaganda to sixth graders.
Mhm.
And do you think AI is basically using the mimicking or using those same techniques? I remember like bandwagon, and I remember um, like pulling on your heartstrings as different types of ways to convince people to do certain things, choose certain things.
Yeah, your question and just comment remind me of just the term propaganda and how and when it's used. And I'd like to think about it. I'm sort of putting on my economics and history lens for a second, teacher lens, and that I like to think about it in the context of some event that happened in history, or some current event that happens, and then how tools like AI help to exacerbate that, right? And the way I'm thinking about it is AI is grounded on scraping content from the web. The web is often very much an organic living experience, so content that's being developed with future iterations of AI. AI is often using that. And so if misinformation is rampant or being dominated with these tools, then there could be a correlation between that and misinformation or propaganda use, as you pointed out. I really like that point though, Deb. Thank you for sharing.
That makes sense. Thanks for pointing out too that AI isn't when it's true AI, there's not always an intention behind it, but how it was created, the intention is basically, like you said, scraped out of what's already been presented.
That's right. Yeah. I gave you all an extra minute, but is there any general thoughts before we move on to the next sort of section here? Again, the hope here is that we have the very sequence of defining, introducing, and then making sure that there's a column of a specific area that you want to hit on, as opposed to generally talking about media literacy when it comes down to AI and misinformation. All right, let's move on to the next thing, unless there's any other questions. I'm going to practice this for you now, and then I'm assuming I'm working with students. And so if you are an elementary school teacher, I might choose something developmentally that's more appropriate. If you're a high school teacher, if you work with students in middle school, I might ask your students to think about videos that they've seen. I'm going with one, which is this idea of my attention being captured, right? And so I want to scrutinize media and deconstruct a message through this lens. And so what I'm doing with my students is assuming that this is what we're going to be discussing, or this is how we're going to be teaching this particular skill. And so what I've done is I pulled a TikTok video, and what I want you to sort of see is answer, what techniques do you see that are used to keep your attention on the video?
Oh. So embarrassing, reminds me, once in a restaurant, I ran into Gorbachev. And he said, Mr. Movie Star, are you nervous? I said, no, Mr. Gorbachev. Nervous.
As much as I like Tom Cruise and think he's got a nice hair during the 90s or something, I don't want to continue watching the video, but let's just sort of like analyze this. What techniques you all think were used to keep your attention? Anybody feel like unmuting or sharing their thoughts?
I thought maybe the movement forward, it looked like he was coming at me, trying to talk to me.
Yeah, I love that. Wonderful, right? So that perspective that you see, like the camera shots is from far to end. He had that initial sort of trip. He was tripping over something. I love it. What else?
The fact that he fell, because a lot of the TikTok videos right now is about like people falling, or like the fails, or however they call it. So that was like the attention getter, and then like he's right away starts talking. So he already has your attention. So you're already like, oh, well, might as well listen.
Jeez, you must be a TikTok influencer or not, but that is one of the most powerful statements ever. I love that, Susan. Thank you. You're absolutely right, right? Understanding the trends, they hook you right away, right? And the other thing is that, obviously it's a celebrity that's speaking at us. You and I am assuming as adults, we know that this is fake, but why and how that's not what we're trying to answer here for our students. We're trying to answer techniques that are used to keep our attention. And so I would, as you just pointed out so eloquently, Susan, I would begin to have those conversations with the students, because that is essentially where media literacy skills come in. How are we deconstructing the message and going a level like below that? And I meant that very positively, Susan, just because I would follow you on TikTok or whatever medium if you were a star, because that's very cool. So, all right, any other general reactions or thoughts or questions that they have with this activity? This is very easy to do if you don't have a TikTok account or if you don't use it at your site. There's hundreds of videos that I'm happy to send your way that are developmentally appropriate for your kids, that you could begin this process of talking about things like, as you pointed out, Deb, earlier, propaganda, Austin, that you started with, which is this healthy sense of curiosity and critique, looking at content that reinforces some of that. All right, are we okay, everyone? Can I keep going? Are we good so far for folks? All right, lots of love, everybody. I appreciate it. We're almost there. I just want to make sure that we're good with that.
Question. I've never been on TikTok and I was always proud of that, but do I need to go on for my students? Like, because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of another social media platform. You know,
Yeah.
I got into X and Facebook and this and that, and you can just be on the rabbit hole forever. So I'm like, okay, this one, I'm not going to do it. But do I need to do it for my students to relate to them, to help them? If I have to, I will for them.
Gloria, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I would certainly not be on a tool like TikTok. That's certainly not a recommendation I would give. One of the things I would often would ask my students is, what are some videos that you're seeing that made you laugh, that made you think, that made you sort of, and then that's where I would get those links from those videos to then download and remove yourself, instead of signing up for an account and then going through that rabbit hole. There's, again, nothing's wrong with TikTok per se. That's sort of the way I would look at it and approach it and that experience. That's a great question. So, and if you do, yeah, I'll stop there. I'm not the joker anymore at 4:08. So let's continue as a whole on that. So this is one technique that you can use. I'm going to give you one else about sort of the video, right? The other thing that you want to ask questions around is, I'd like to ask my students what they're curious about. Are there other aspects of the video that they thought they've seen? When I ask questions like this, when I've hosted groups or students to talk about videos around misinformation and AI, I often, students are able to sort of identify my own blind spots. Like Susan, as you pointed out, the tripping, that context that you shared around trending videos, those are the things that help me as a teacher to really think critically about the videos that I show in the future. So. All right, let me just give you some resources. Once you sort of identified, at Common Sense, we have a number of lessons. If you're not familiar with the content, if you click on this particular link, you will actually see that we've have a number of media literacy skills. So they range from deciphering whether or not a video is real or fake, to things like clickbait. But what we've done for you in our collection this season is ensuring that you can package this content based on the topics that you want to teach. If I were you and you're interested in teaching a lesson on this, I might select maybe one lesson and I would teach about half of the content just to inspire kids. If you're thinking about doing this in a much more broader sort of scope and you're thinking about it as a unit, I would find 2 or 3 topics that your kids resonate with. And then follow sort of the same sequence where you're talking about a particular area, you're showcasing one particular example, and then you're allowing your students to co-create an alternative, which we'll get into in a second. I will give, if you're following along, I don't want to sort of spend the time looking through the lessons, but the themes range from conspiracy theories to how to react to things around breaking news. And again, they range from 15 minutes to 45-minute activities. So if you're not already doing some of the work at Common Sense, I encourage you to look and peruse through it. You can click on this link to find out more information on it. All right, let me, I think I had some 90 seconds around that, and I'll give you time. You know what, why don't we actually do that? If you want to take about a minute or so before we move on, just to review some of the content that I've shared, and we'll take a quick pause again to see the content. If you don't have the link, if you joined us late, I added it on the chat again. It's a link to the presentation And that slide is slide 19. All right, everyone. Let's continue. Thank you for sharing that. Is there any questions before we move forward? Is there anything that I might be able to answer for the group? All right. Let me level set before we close off with the last 10 or so minutes. Are any of these tips or strategies helpful for folks based on their role? Are there other sort of areas that you're struggling with, or you might need some support from the rest of the group? I'd like to kind of open it up for the rest of the group to see what it is that you all do to teach some of these skills in general.
I use the common source resources a lot, but those books I hadn't found before. So that slide that you had shown
cool.
a second ago, I appreciate having those different levels of books that I could share with the class.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Deb. Let's go into that now, unless there's any other questions. All right, let me give you some additional resource. So the first was some lessons that you can go through. What we've done then is I had our content team on the media side select books that are both developmentally appropriate and also align with some of the themes that we were talking about. And so if you are a librarian on the call, or if you regularly introduce books to your students at the K through second level, these are a number of books that you can use that reinforce some of these the lessons that we've covered. If you're in 3rd to 5th grade, we sort of have identified other books that might talk about broader digital citizenship lessons in literacy. So this is a great way to pull some content out. Has anybody resonated with any of these books? If you're a 3rd or 5th grade teacher, has anybody read them or connected with them? My little one loves Bad Kitty so much that she wants a cat. So right. Right, and then finally in high school, if you're not familiar with many of these, or if you work them, I really like this one. I recently read Accountable. I thought that was a great way of addressing and talking about hate speech online. So what I've done is essentially giving you text, and then the lesson or the activity can correspond to these books if you do share and provide this resources for your students. So. All right, let me just close with some final things that you can do. So thus far, we've talked about strategy, how you actually can introduce some of these terms to your students. I'm giving you some lessons and resources that might help you in your planning. I'd like to close our time thinking about how to move beyond our students into educating and engaging our kids. Hey, Peanut Butter, nice to see you. I hope your day at school was awesome. So I'm giving a presentation, but I'm glad you're smiling. Beautiful. Let me close with our family resources, just so you know. One of the things that I would want to do as an educator is making sure my families have sort of a foundation for how to engage and talk about these things. And I hate to sort of put Santa Clara County Office of Education on the spot here, but they created a really amazing online course to support media literacy for adults as well as students. So I want to give a shameless plug, but it's not shameless. It's actually a very good plug to ensure that if your families are looking for ways to think about media literacy as a foundation, this is a wonderful, wonderful self-paced course. It's both in English and in Spanish, and it has some great resources as well for it. Chris, at some point I might put you on the spot, but by all means, feel free to share your thoughts on the course itself and what it does. But we'll wait to the very end to do that. And then finally, there are many families out there that are just really struggling with how to model these behaviors for their kids, model specific behaviors for their child. And so one of the things that I would recommend And Common Sense did this. We created a very practical course. It doesn't, it's probably about 20 minutes, 30 minutes in total in length. But one of the things we're encouraging families to do is to think about their own behaviors, whether or not they're modeling positive online behaviors around some of these topics. Here's one of the scenarios that we shared, which is you're out with your friends and you receive a number of texts and app alerts. Right at the same time, your friend is actually in the middle of sharing some personal news with you. Do you check your phone or do you listen to your friend, right? And some of you might be thinking, I wonder what I would do. Sarah, what would you do? I sort of see your eyes kind of darting back and forth. Would you mind unmuting and sharing? Would you check your phone or listen to your friend? You seem like a good friend.
Me, Sarah?
Yeah.
I would listen to my friend. And
Yeah.
I usually try to keep my phone somewhere else when I'm, having lunch or something with friends and family, spouses.
And many, when I give this slide, will often say, it might be my kid. I don't know, right? And so like there's so many nuances to this, but the idea here is we want to support our families to both understand the terms, that's where the county office course comes in, as well as how to model some of these behaviors for their students. So again, I encourage you to look at these two resources. And again, the final piece is that we want to help our families think about what media creation actually looks like. And so at Common Sense, if you're not familiar with our ratings, by all means, feel free to share this. What I would do instead of sharing just the link is maybe share how it is that families can assess appropriate media use for their kids. We've come up with this rubric every time we're looking at media. And so a really great way to highlight, the film of the month, if you're sharing that, or recommendations. I've seen that in a principal's message before, is to pull apart why it is that media is appropriate for that child and allow your families to begin that process of assessing content that is not only appropriate for them, but also represents things that they actually value. So if you want to know a little bit more, I encourage you to kind of look at this link as we follow along. The final sort of resource that I'll share with you, sometimes visually it's important to highlight some of these terms. And so we at Common Sense have these posters again that you can obviously print. Feel free to reach out to me. I think I have a number of them. And then I've created this Canva infographic that is about a tech agreement, but you can easily replace it with some media literacy terms. It's an editable document or template that you can use to create some of these terms as I pointed out, what your media literacy definition is, maybe some of those categories around how to deconstruct a message, and some of the columns that I've sort of provided for you. So, all right, you all, I'm talking at you and I'm going to stop being so preachy. Let me close with just one final piece. But before I do, let me just see everybody's face for a second. And I guess I'll put you all, not to the test, but mostly to kind of see what you all intend to do, not only with my content, but what your plan is in addressing media literacy at your respective sites. Let's make it a somewhat of a group therapy or group session so we can talk about our experiences about how we want to apply some of these things. So Olivia Cortez, you have a wonderful name. May I ask you to unmute for a second and share maybe some next steps on your end? That is, unless you're the person that was on a boat in the Pacific. I know the suspense is building me. All right, I'll give you a chance at some point, Olivia. Lily Johnson, would you like to share? Your smile and your image says a lot. Would you like to share some maybe next steps you're thinking about in your work? Yeah, you.
Hi, sorry, I was just having my lunch. Yeah, I was just thinking, so I teach high school, I teach ELD classes, English language development classes, and I like the idea of using the TikTok videos because I'm trying to prepare the students for their LPAC, the state assessment. So I kind of was thinking, what a fun way to show like a TikTok video and have the students describe what they see, because one of the assessments is asking for them to look at images, right? Look at this image, what do you see or what's happening here? So I was thinking that would be a really cool way to to do that. And I've been telling my husband the last 2 years, I want to implement more memes into my lessons to describe, like when you're tired or you're feeling, but yeah, I was thinking the TikTok videos idea would be a great way to get them to practice their speaking skills and even their writing skills, or even writing their response and having their peers read each other's response.
I love that. Lily, that is amazing. Sorry, I cut you off. Continue. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that was it. That was my idea.
Amazing. I'm going to add on the chat for you. Not that I regularly go to TikTok, but I'm constantly always looking at what is appropriate for students on the chat. You can search deep fake videos or deep fake videos on that. They regularly update those videos, and it's just something that I encourage educators, especially at the high school level, to begin that process of what it actually looks like, right? And I love, as Krista sort of pointed out, I like the fact that you are thinking about sort of the usage of memes as a way to engage students. That sounds really fun. So kudos for you on that. Anyone else? Any other ways at which they want to sort of apply some of these terms or concepts? We've covered obviously a lot. So
I think I just really appreciate the idea of involving parents, or like the home life around media literacy, right? Because oftentimes students can see, oh, this behavior applies inside of my classroom, not inside of maybe my home life or other places outside of the school setting. But to just make it a holistic approach, I think is what is going to be life changing, right? Cultural changing. So I wanted to point that out. I think that's amazing.
I love it, Tani. Thank you very much for that. And it doesn't have to be really difficult, folks. It really can just be, let's name the term this month. I've seen where principals like highlight things that are happening. I think what I've found when I speak in front of parents is they often just don't have, or they're in need. They do have, I shouldn't say that. They do have the skills. They don't often know how to transfer those skills to effective communications with their kids in that moment. I've heard from many parents to say, I don't even know the tool itself, and so I feel really lost in this case. And so sometimes providing families agencies with what you shared, Tani, of like highlighting some of those things might be really helpful. All right. Any other last sort of burning sort of comments or thoughts about how they think about applying, or just general thoughts that they might have in terms of using lessons or resources in their own classrooms to share with others? All right, wonderful people. We're going to go another minute, and I'm going to just close with, well, how does this actually relate to then the second part of media literacy, and that is ensuring that our kids are co-creating this. And what I've done for you is, I know podcasting and I know the idea of kids sharing their thoughts has grown in popularity. What I've done in the next few slides for you, and we won't go through all of them, is giving you a roadmap of what to do and how to actually do that. So what I've done here is I've shared sort of rubrics that we've seen be effective when setting expectations around how kids communicate. I've given you some tools that we at Common Sense value highly in terms of what apps might be available, with basic apps being the voice recorder for that. And I've also given you some really great context here in terms of how to look at content or curriculum that reinforces effective podcasting and content creation for kids. So I encourage you to look at that. If you also are looking at podcasts as a curriculum or as an alternative, at Common Sense, we rate and review those. And so I identified my favorite ones that I often use with my daughter. This is a great way that you can look at and listen to podcasts to not only get some examples, but also showcase what it actually looks like to do this. And then I think I've added some other ones for DEI purposes, making sure that we're celebrating and talking about and highlighting diverse stories. So this is a great way of looking at very different ways in which storytelling happens. I don't know if you've all seen Circle Round. That's I mean, this one, I mean, there's so many good ones, but I encourage you to look at this link. I've linked up for you those podcasts as well. So, all right, to that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you. And I'll be on for another few minutes if you all want any questions or, have specific use cases. But I will ask if there's any question now to either unmute or share it in the chat before we close off. And as I pointed out, please, 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 if you're just needing some additional support, or if you're just thinking about what are the next steps in your classroom or your case, reach out. I'm happy to give you so many examples, and I'm happy to work with you by providing so many examples that I've seen across my experience. So. All right, good people. Let me smile at you one more time. Hopefully it's a really authentic smile at 426 and it's not sweaty, but I really appreciate you all being alive. Austin, I'll share my mad props to you first because you unmuted and were vulnerable first. So thank you for that. Deb, lots of love with your insights. Thank you very much for asking your questions. And Gloria, Susan, thank you all for giving your perspectives as well as others that I've included on the chat. So.
I am just going to call out that you do have a question in the chat from Gloria, which is wondering if, Jamie, you have any recommendations for our youngest scholars, for example, kinders, to sort of begin this journey in media literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can point you to some of our early childhood resources at Common Sense where we're actually looking at that. That would be the specific ask. One of the things that I've seen really helpful for families is going to offer very specific tools. And so looking for those tools that are actually applicable for learning and having families learn with those tools themselves. And so if you wait a second as folks jump off, I can quickly find that link for you and add it for you. I also have some additional one pager that you might be able to share with families around the reasons behind introducing tech for learning for the littles. So that's a really great question, and that's how I might frame it. Sophia, let me give you the access to the deck.
I love the idea of including families. Would you have it in English and Spanish or only English?
No, we have it in English and Spanish as well. So. And Sophia, the slide is on slide 39 that you'll see that. I'll give you the direct list as well. Here's a direct
I see a lot of my parents come to pick up their kiddos, and then the minute they pick up their kiddos, they like give them a phone or an iPad. And I'm like, talk to your kid. Don't give them your phone or your iPad to distract them. And then they want to talk to me, and they don't want the kid involved in like a three-way conversation. They just want it to be the two grown-ups. And here, play on my phone. So I'm trying to like pull them out of that. Let's talk all three of us together.
Yeah. Join us for the next hour as we talk about all the ways in which we model inappropriate behaviors for our kids. Yeah, let me raise my hand nice and high because I am often fall victim to tech use as a distraction. So I hear you 100%, Gloria. Is very frustrating. It's also a really great opportunity to reset that with our families too. So thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts, any other questions? I'll stick around if you have any specific use cases that you might have, but I want to respect your time. So I'm going to give you a minute back of your time today. And yeah, thank you all. Literally, thanks for being alive today. And, if you're not smiling, hopefully you're smiling after this call. So keep doing your thing. And I appreciate you all. I don't even know what TV was, Gloria.
Thank you so much, Jamie. There were so many appreciations in the chat for all of the amazing resources and just your way of putting things in actionable chunks. I like the way that you've broken things into ways that teachers at all different grade levels can access this information and share it with their students and families. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our group today.
Lots of love. Thank you very much, Stephanie. I appreciate you all.
Yeah, and for our group, I'm going to go ahead and go back to sharing my screen. We do just have a few things as we close out today's EdTech Playground. We want to thank you all so much for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Anu, who's going to close us out for today.
Okay, hello everyone. So we are at the end and we had an exciting presentation by Jamie and time to close out. So we always like to end with a optimistic closure. So please take a few minutes to share with us any of your ahas or new learnings or some good takeaways that you had from today's session. So give you a few minutes to just share your thoughts on how did the presentation go and what are your key takeaways from today's session.
Can I share?
Absolutely, please do.
Hi. I was just thinking of how I could like bring this into out, like not just in my classroom, but with my own kids. Um, I seen one of the comments say how now kids are watching other kids play video games, and it's so true. My son does that, and I till this day I still don't understand why he does it or what's like so captivating about like watching someone else play a video game that they could be watching. So I kind of like want to look into those books and kind of read to him more because he does like playing and like he's not addicted to the screen, but when he does get the screen, he goes to that like, and I'm trying to figure out why or understand the thought process behind that, or why is that amusing. So I kind of want to like bring more of this, like what I learned today, and try to like understand my son better. He does have autism, but I know it doesn't have to do with his disability because I've seen a lot of kids who are not disabled or who do not have anything, and they still do the same thing, watch other kids play. So I kind of want to like bring in the books, and like that was my aha moment, like, oh, maybe if I introduce him to these books, like maybe he'll like realize like, wait, I could be playing instead of watching someone play. I don't know. I probably not making sense, but it makes sense in my head.
You're right. It's always it's a big struggle. We are living in this age where we cannot separate ourselves from technology and the use of media. We are in the midst of it. And as Jamie said, we have to be like good role models. And that's what one way to address it. And the other is, of course, like finding these alternatives. The books that Jamie shared, which are there, I love those all grade level books that we can, read and share and talk to our kids. So I think it's a genuine struggle. It's not, don't feel as if you're the only one there. All of us are going through this, and all of us, the more we learn, the more we get aware, the better we are prepared to, deal with these situations. So thank you for sharing, though. Okay. So I want to also tell you about our next playground. It is in December. It's on December 3rd, and it is during the Computer Science Education Week. And our presenter is a classroom teacher who will be sharing with you some of the code.org's free computer science curriculum and platform, and show us some free resources on code.org. So look out for that date and mark it on your calendar. And moving on to the next slide, and we have other dates on it too for the other playgrounds. Follow us on Facebook. We love to hear from you, and it's great to see our group growing and connecting with you. So please do follow us on Facebook. Our link is right there, and we look forward to increasing our followers. And thank you so much. We are ending a little early today, but thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you with us. And thank you so much, Jamie, for this very exciting, innovative, and informative talk. And Common Sense Education is really the place to go to find credible, right away usable resources with students, with families, and for yourself too. So thank you so much for walking us through the website and showing us some new things that are there. And I think Stephanie pointed out we have some great resources on AI too. So do look into that. And with that, we are closing. And if you have any questions, we are here for another couple minutes, and we would love to answer or hear your thoughts about the session today. So feel free to stay on for another couple minutes to talk to us. Otherwise, we're done. Thank you so much for coming.